First, I would like to thank Dr. Kedarishwarji for inviting me for a very interesting session that she is organizing on behalf of the society she is running, and on the occasion of World Heritage Week. I think India has tremendous potential, and we have already 40 World Heritage sites in the country, and there are a lot of sites which are being considered now for the this important status. Now today I'll just speak on the research done on the Harappan civilization, because this year we are completing 100 years of the discovery of the Harappan civilization. So on the occasion of the centenary year, I would like to tell you about the important contribution made by some of the important maybe scholars, individuals, and some of the important institutions in the country and outside. So I will share my PPT, and with the help of this, I will talk to you. Is my PPT visible?
Yes, sir. It needs to go in the slideshow mode. Right now, I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
see all the slides. Yes. Yeah, yeah, fine.
You can see now.
Yes.
Okay, so completing 100 years of the research on the Harappan civilization. Now, this research is generally divided into three phases. The research that was carried out before 1970, uh, the research between 1970 and 2000, and 2000 to 2021. The situation before 1970 was very interesting because some of the big sites like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were excavated. Then in this particular phase, also some important sites were discovered in the Indian subcontinent. Some sites in Pakistan, some sites in India. And by 1970, the extent of the Harappan culture, Harappan civilization was quite clear. By then, we had already discovered sites, up to the Iran border in the north, in the Makran coast on the west, and also on the border of Gujarat and Maharashtra in south, and in the western part of UP. So that was the area which became quite clear by then. But 1947 was a very important event in the history of the country, because country was divided into two nations, India and Pakistan. So in 1947, most of the sites known to the scholarly world or to common people, they went to Pakistan. The iconic sites like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, they went to Pakistan, and there were only two sites on this side of the border. These two sites are namely Rangpur in Gujarat and Kotla Niyang Khan in Punjab. So it was a big challenge for the Indian archaeologists, and the Indian archaeologists have accepted this challenge very efficiently, and they carried out very extensive survey along the Indo-Pak border, and also in states like Gujarat, Rajasthan. And today, the situation that we have discovered nearly 2,000 Harappan settlements, out of which nearly 1,500 are located on this side of the border. And then after 2000, of course, a lot of explorations happened, a lot of new sites were selected for detailed study. And during this time, sites like Rakhigadi, Dholavira were excavated on very large scale. And also in a lot of new researches, new scientific disciplines, scientific archaeological research was initiated on the Harappan culture. So I'm going to give details of that, rather a gist of that. So these are the two sides iconic sites, the sites of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, and I'm sure that everybody knows about the history behind the discovery of the site of Harappa. The site of Harappa was discovered accidentally by archaeologists because people were robbing the bricks from this particular site for the construction of railway line between Lahore and Multan. And then Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, Sir John Marshall, he came to know about this destruction. He stopped the destruction and he initiated research at this particular site. And simultaneously, the sites like Mohenjo-daro also was selected in Sindh region, and these two sites are considered to be the iconic or the classical Harappan sites. So this, the research began in fact with this. Before the discovery of the Harappan, the site of Harappa, a lot of scholars had visited this particular site. In fact, in 1826, Charles Masson had visited. Then Sir Alexander Burnes had visited the site in 1831. And then, of course, scholars like Sir Alexander Cunningham. In fact, he made number of visits to the site. And Alexander Cunningham was the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India. He was appointed in 1861. So he was the first person, in fact, to carry out a small excavation at the site of Harappa. And he has also published that particular report. And each time he visited on 3 occasions between 1953 and 1975. And whatever discoveries were made by him, now those discoveries were published by him in some scientific journal. So this is how the sites of Harappa was brought to the notice to the scholarly world by Alexander Cunningham. And then, of course, the site of Mohenjo-daro was discovered in 1911 by D.R. Bhandarkar. He was the first person to bring to the notice of the scholarly world the site of Mohenjo-daro. The site of Mohenjo-daro, of course, is known to the people because it is called the meaning of Mohenjo-daro is Mound of Death. So people always consider that this is the place of their ancestors, and they used to carry worship on these. But it was not known to the scholarly world. It was because of the efforts of D.R. Bhandarkar, a great Indologist, in 1911 and 12, that this site came to the notice of the scholarly world. And then, of course, the excavation started at this particular site also. So there are a lot of Indian scholars who have contributed immensely to the research on the Harappan culture. We always give credit to John Marshall, but John Marshall, being the Director General, he was the director of both the excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. But the actual work was carried out by Indian scholars like Dayaram Sahni at the site of Harappa. Then R.D. Bhandarkar, he was the main architect at the site of Mohenjo-daro. He was the main excavator. So these scholars have contributed immensely to the history of the discovery of the Harappan civilization. So you can see the maybe photograph of D.R. Bhandarkar. He was working, of course, in Pune, and he was the first to discover the site of Mohenjo-daro. Then, of course, we also give a lot of credit to John Marshall because being a Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India and also being the director of the excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, he made sure that large scale excavations were carried out at these two sites. And because in those days, the concept of large scale excavation was not really was not in vogue in Indian subcontinent. So he was the first scholar to introduce this particular method of excavation in Indian subcontinent. And the credit of uncovering large remains at both the sides goes to him. And the other important contribution of John Marshall is that he has published the reports of the finds at both the sites. And because of that, the Harappan archaeologists, they could use these reports for writing the history of the Harappan people, Harappan culture. So the credit of course goes to him. The Those excavations started in 1920-21. For 4 years, the archaeologists were not really aware about the antiquity of the remains that they were excavating. They did not know how old the remains are, and most of the scholars were of the opinion that these remains belong to the stupa period or the Buddhist period or the early Stoic period, because nothing was known before 6th century BC in that era. And also, before the excavations at this side, at these two sides, most of the historians always thought that there's a big gap in the history of the country, and India jumps from Stone Age to the Stupa period. That was the concept of most of the historians. But because of the discovery of the Harappan civilization, the antiquity of the settled life was taken back by 3,000 years at one stroke. So this is the importance of the discovery of the Harappan civilization. But as I say that John Marshall was trying to understand the dates of the remains that he excavated, and he could get the clue about the antiquity of the remains because of his association with one Sir Leonard Woolley, who was excavating simultaneously two famous Mesopotamian sites, Ur and Uruk in Mesopotamia. And they met in London, and John Marshall showed him the photographs of the finds from both Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And when Leonard Wooley saw the photograph of seals, he immediately recalled that these type of seals have been reported from the site of Ur in Mesopotamia. And in Ur, that the history starts there from 3000 BCE. They have the written records from 3000 BCE, and these written records have been deciphered. So their history begins from 3000 BCE. So the level in which the seals were found, that level was precisely dated because there was some dating material in that level also. So that level was dated to 2450 BC. And Sir Leonard Wooley suggested that the remains that you are excavating, they're as old as 2400 or 2500 BCE. And then, of course, John Marshall wrote a first article in Illustrated London News on 20th September 1924, announcing the discovery of the Harappan civilization. So that was a very important maybe stage in the research on the Harappan culture. So these are some of the seals, which were discovered by earlier scholars before the excavation was carried out. These seals were published in various journals, popular as well as research journals. And then, of course, you can see the photograph of Banerjee, R.D. Banerjee. His contributions to the history of research on Harappan civilization is immense. In fact, he is the one, in fact, who carried out actual excavation operation at the site of Mohenjo-daro and brought to the notice very significant remains from this particular site. So his contributions are considered immense. John Marshall, of course, I have shown his contribution. He is the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, who carried out excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And when this particular civilization was discovered, John Marshall called this as Indo-Sumerian culture or Indo-Sumerian civilization. That was the first term used by him. And later, of course, after the discovery or identification, this particular culture was called the Harappan culture, Harappan civilization. The early excavations were not very systematic. They were always, very chaotic excavation. A lot of people were working, and the beginning is very chaotic. But when you look at the journey of the Harappan research, then you realize, how systematic, this particular journey is. Then I would also like to mention about the contribution and the sacrifice made by N.G. Mujumdar. He was the one, who was carrying out exploration in the Balochistan region, a very hostile region, and he is the one who laid his life for the cause of archaeology. When he was surveying in Balochistan, he was killed by the tribal people there, and this is the only example in the entire world where an archaeologist was killed because of the, because or the for the sake of the discipline. Then Sir Orelstein also, his name also crops up because he is the one who started systematic exploration in the Saraswati Basin, which is known as Ghaggar Hakra Basin. And in 1934-35 and 1939 and 40, he carried out a very extensive survey in the Ghaggar Basin, which is known as the ancient Saraswati Basin or the Rigvedic Saraswati Basin, and he discovered number of sites. So for the first time, it was realized that the Harappan sites are not confined merely to the Indus River Basin, but they are also outside. And he is the person, who began this particular research. Then Sir Ernest Mackay also was a very important part of the research team at the site of Harappa and also at Mohenjo-daro. And he is the one who started systematic research on the Harappan pottery. And he also had worked in Mesopotamia. So he was very, very well versed about the remains found in that particular region. And John Marshall was highly benefited because of the presence of Ernest Mackay in the excavation. And he also has helped in the publication of the report of these two sites. So Mackay's contributions are quite immense. Then Sir John Marshall also has contributed immensely to the research on the Harappan culture. He carried out excavations at Harappa, and he is the one who identified the pre-Harappan phase or the wall, the defense wall, which is said that this is a pre-urban defense wall at the site of Harappa. So he was the first to identify the pre-Harappan phase, which is now identified as the early Harappan phase of the Harappan culture. But his contributions are also immense. And he's the one, who brought or who introduced a new excavation method in the Indian subcontinent. And the method which he introduced is called vertical excavation method. And this vertical method is very, very useful for maybe reconstructing the cultural sequence of any site or to read the history of the site. This particular excavation method is very, very important. And he introduced this particular method at the site of Harappa. So his contributions are also quite, immense. Uh, then of course, there are some American scholars like Walter Fair Service, then French scholar Cardi. They also have, in the initial stage before 1970, they have made tremendous contribution by discovering new sites uh, in the uh, in the Indus River Basin and in Baluchistan part. And they also are responsible for the discovery of some of the very, very important sites like Kilegul Muhammad, Dam Sada. These are the sites where we find the evidence of the settled life going back to almost 7,000 BCE. So their contributions are also immense. But there's one American scholar, Dales, who uh, also has carried out very, very important research on the Harappan culture. So these American scholars have also excavated sites like Code DG, which is very, very important early Harappan site in that part. So this is how the research began in the greater Indus plain. But then, as I say that, after 1947, a number of Indian scholars have contributed to the development of Harappan research in India. And some of the foremost names I can recall are Professor B.B. Lal, J.P. Joshi. These are the people who initiated a large-scale exploration in this part of the uh, Harappan region, and they discovered number of sites. So J.P. Joshi particularly, now he carried out explorations in Kutch part of Gujarat, also in Saurashtra. He explored and he discovered number of sites. But the most important site that he excavated was the site of Surkotada. And Surkotada is in the news because this is the site where we find the remains of horse. And there is a lot of debate about the presence of horse in the Harappan levels, but there are some scholars always who have identified the horse bones, the domesticated horse bones at the site of Joshi, at the site of Surkotara, and this site was excavated by J.P. Joshi. And this is a site now which is very small site, but it is highly fortified site. And for the first time, it was also revealed that it is not that the big Harappan cities were fortified, but even small Harappan places also were fortified. And this was one of the important sites. Then, of course, Jeb Jari's his contributions are also immense because he's the one who carried out a very lengthy excavation at the site of Mehergarh. And Mehergarh in Indian subcontinent is a very significant site because it is here that Jeb Jari established the presence of settled life going back to almost 7000 BCE. And it is here he identified the cultural development from 7000 BC up to the beginning of the Harappan culture. And it was clear, it was because of his research, it became clear that the same people who began agriculture, who were developing here, they were ultimately they were transformed into Harappan culture at some stage. And he is a person who carried out research in this particular respect. Then the other name, American scholar from University of Pennsylvania, is Gregory Purcell. He surveyed the entire Saurashtra and discovered nearly 450 sites. That was his, PhD research in that region. And he also excavated sites like Rosdi, which has provided a complete cultural sequence, Harappan cultural sequence in Saurashtra. So these are some of the important contributions made by the scholars. But I would like to mention a little bit about A. Ghosh. A. Ghosh became the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India in 1950s, maybe early 50s. And he systematically undertook exploration in the Gaggar Basin, which is identified as the as the Rigvedic Saraswati region. And it is here that he discovered some of the early Harappan sites. And he was the first scholar to indicate that if you want to understand the origin of the Harappan civilization in the Indian subcontinent, he said that one must look into the early Harappan phase. And that was the hint he had provided. And subsequently, of course, a lot of scholars have studied the early Harappan phase, and they realized that the Harappan civilization has emerged from this early Harappan phase. And he discovered a number of sites in the Saraswati basin. And for the first time, it was revealed that there are a number of sites outside the Indus River in Indus basin also. And today, if you glance at the distribution of the Harappan settlements, you realize that nearly two-thirds of the Harappan settlements are located in the Saraswati basin. The Saraswati basin was so important, and this is he is the scholar who was responsible for identifying the importance of this particular region. Then this Katie Dalal, the first lady student from Deccan College in 70s, 90s, rather late 60s and 70s. She carried out exploration in the most difficult region, Sri Ganganagar district of Rajasthan, which is almost a desert part. And it is here that she discovered nearly 450 sites. And she also carried out small excavation. The excavations at Kalibanga by Bibi Lal is very important because this excavation clearly established that there is a proper classical Harappan phase on this side of the border also. Secondly, he is the one who also clearly identified the early Harappan phase in the Indian subcontinent. So he identified two phases at Kalibanga. The early phase or the lowermost phase was the early Harappan phase dated between 3500 BC to 2500 BC, and then of course succeeded by the most prosperous urban phase at the site from 2500 BC to 1750 BC. So this site is very important to understand the presence of the Harappan phase in Indian subcontinent. The excavations have established the characteristic feature of the Harappan culture in Indian subcontinent. Secondly, it is here that he discovered the only evidence of the plowed field found in any Harappan site, and those plowed fields were excavated at this particular site. And also, he has studied the the town planning at this particular settlement, and he could identify the citadel part of the settlement and the lower part. So this excavation is very important and established the early phase. So these are the plowed fields that he discovered at the site of Kalibanga. And what is interesting that same pattern has continued till today. So there is a lot of continuity from Harappan till the modern times. He also discovered and excavated number of Harappan burials at Kalibangan, and we have clearly clear-cut idea about the burial pattern followed by the Harappans. This is the plan that was prepared by Professor B.B. Lal, the citadel or the Acropolis part and the lower town. Here you can see clearly. Also at this particular site were found the remains of chicken, the roasted chicken, and also the remains of tandoor. So for the first time, it was revealed that the Harappans are the ones who are the authors of the chicken tandoor in the Indian subcontinent. So antiquity of chicken tandoor goes back to the Harappan times, and that evidence comes from the site of Kalibanga. Then S.R. Rao's contributions are immense. He excavated two very important sites. One is Rangpur, the only site which was on Indian side in 1947, and the other site that he excavated was the site of Lothal. And Lothal, let me tell you that this is the site which has provided the earliest evidence of dockyard anywhere in the world, dated to around 2450 BC or almost 2500 BC. And the Harappans, because of this particular evidence, it is now clear that the Harappans were pioneer seafarers. These are the people who established the maritime contact with outside world for carrying out trade. And the dockyard that is found at the site of Lothal. Now, this dockyard was meant for not only for carrying out the trade, but also for building and repairing ships. So the earliest evidence of building ship is found in the Harappan civilization, and this is the contribution of this particular gentleman who excavated the site of Lothal in Gujarat. At the site of Lothal, also for the first time, the foreign contacts were revealed. These are some of the seals from the Gulf region, from Persian Gulf, and also from Oman, Bahrain, etc. And for the first time, it was revealed that the Harappans had contact with outside world, and this is the physical remains, physical evidence found at the site of Lothal. And you can see here the dockyard that was excavated uh, by S.R. Rao, very important evidence. And then, of course, he also identified the ceramic phase in Saurashtra, and he realized that the ceramic found here is slightly different from the ceramic found at the classical Harappan sites like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And there, he could realize that there is some regional diversity. And Gregory Posel was the first person, in fact, to identify properly the regional diversity of the Harappan culture in Saurashtra. So these are some of the important pioneer institutions which have carried out excavations like Kurukshetra University in Haryana has contributed immensely. The National Museum, Delhi, also has contributed immensely to the Harappan research. They have also excavated some sites. Deccan College has excavated number of sites, including the site of Rakigadi and the MS University Baroda. These are the leading institutions in the country who have taken lead in the Harappan research, and they have made all these four institutions have made tremendous contribution to the history of the Harappan culture. By uh, by 1970s or 80s, the extent of the Harappan civilization became quite clear, and we have found sites up to Maharashtra. Daimabad is considered to be the southernmost limit of the site of limit of the Harappan culture. Then Alamgirpur in UP is considered to be the easternmost limit of the Harappan culture, and Shortuga in Afghanistan was considered the northernmost limit. So by 1970s, the total extent of the Harappan civilization became quite clear. And Suraj Ban's name also is worth mentioning because he not only excavated some important sites like Mitatal, Siswal, etc., but he is the scholar who discovered the iconic site of Rakhigadi in 1962-63 when he was doing his research. And that is an important contribution because he brought the site to our notice. We are able to carry out very important excavation at the site. Then these are some of the sites which have been excavated on Indian side, the site of Kunal in Haryana, Banauli also in Haryana, and number of important sites were studied by scholars from different worlds. So this is briefly, but lastly, I just mentioned about the excavations carried out at the site of Dholavira by RS Based. And this site is very, very important because we have found completely different town planning here, because for the first time, it was revealed that the Harappan city is divided into three parts: the upper town, middle town, and lower town. So that is the kind of evidence found here. Secondly, the entire city is made of stone. So it is considered with the Harappan stone city. Everything is made in stone. So that was a very important feature noticed here. Then at this particular site is found a very unique evidence of water harvesting and water management. Very, very important, because you can see here that this city is located between two rivers. One is Manhar and the other one is Mansar. And whenever there is a maybe flash flood in the desert part, these rivers get flooded, and the Harappans diverted. They put series of check dams on both the rivers, and they diverted entire flood water inside the settlement. And inside the settlement, they made underground water reservoirs. And these, there are a number of underground water reservoirs. They were connected to each other by underground water channel system. So that is a system, which is very, very unique in the contemporary world. So that evidence is also found here. And you can see some of the water reservoirs excavated at this particular site. Uh, Dholavira, of course, is a very, very, very important site. And then finally, of course, now I will come to the site of Rakhigadi. So the research that began at the site of Mohenjo-daro, which is considered the chaotic research, because that time, uh, you know, not much scientific, direction was followed in the excavation. So, but because the sites of Harappa and Mohenjo, they have got burnt brick structures, they were able to excavate number of structures there. But certainly it was not a scientific excavation, a very chaotic excavation. Nearly 500 to 600 people were working at one time there. So from chaotic to the most systematic scientific research, we find at the site of Rakhigadi. So at the site of Rakhigadi, we have introduced some new research methodologies like the GPS survey for the first time, so that by this particular survey, we could identify the extent of the Harappan settlement at Rakhigadi. And now it is becoming clear that Rakhigadi was the biggest Harappan city, which is spread over an area of 550 hectares. Then it is here that we initiated the DNA research for the first time, and this ancient DNA was excavated from the Harappan remains at the site of Rakhigadi. And we know the results of this particular research. Now it has become clear that the Harappan culture and civilization both were established by the indigenous people, by the Indian people only. So that is scientifically proved now. And also we have, for the first time, applied the research called the craniofacial research, by which we can show the look of the Harappan people, how exactly Harappan people look like. So this is the kind of research that was initiated at this particular site. So from simple chaotic research to the most scientific. This is the long journey of the Harappan culture, Harappan research in the Indian subcontinent. And because of the efforts of number of scholars, number of institutions, today we have clear-cut idea about the life of the Harappan people. We know what was the social organization of these people. We know what was the town planning followed by these people. We know what are the technologies these people had perfected, and what technology these people have introduced for the manufacture of various crafts. So we have clear-cut idea about that. We have clear-cut about idea about their socio, economic and the religious conditions of the beliefs of the people. We know about the food habit of the people because of the application of scientific methods. We know about who are the Harappan people, and what these people ate, what was the diseases prevalent that time. So all these, this entire, you know the holistic history of the Harappan culture is known today because of the systematic research carried out on the Harappan culture. So this is in brief the history of the research on the Harappan culture in Indian subcontinent. Thank you very much.